This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com. Okay, Bruchim Habayim, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to join you. I see on the line some of the Chaverim who I had the privilege of meeting when I was recently in London and Manchester. And it's really a great honor to join you again. And even though we're living in very difficult times, we are all still reeling from, unfortunately, so many casualties, especially here in New York. Great people, Gedolei Yisrael, Rabbanim, and Baruch Hashem, it looks like it's on the decline. But still, our shuls are not open. I'm in our shul now, but I'm the only one. The walls of the shul are lonely, mevake al baneha. But amazingly, even in such difficult times, it seems that as difficult as the times are, the Torah has exploded even more and more. Who could have imagined that in such a circumstance, almost every day you see shiurim, magidei shiurim are giving shir in one country, delivering it to another continent. The amount of shiurim, the amount of Torah that is proliferating is unheralded. So that's sort of the silver lining, despite the fact that we can't go to the shuls and we can't meet with our magidei shiurim live, but there are opportunities for learning, and in a sense, in an unheralded way. So I'd like to ask you just for a moment to sit back and just going to adjust this, and just to imagine for yourself for a moment, you're sitting in a very comfortable situation. You were in an office, perhaps an air-conditioned office, and you were kicking back. You were in a plush chair, you were in a comfortable chair, the air conditioner was on, and you're in the lap of luxury. And you're sitting there and you're sipping water in a glass, and there's ice in your glass, and there's a lemon in the cup, and you're quite comfortable. You just ate dinner, and you had a nice steak dinner, and you could not be more comfortable. And you see passing by the door of your office, you see a guy walking by with a pitcher, and he has iced tea in his pitcher, and you say, "My friend, my merciful friend, who has mercy, have mercy on me. I would like some iced tea." In America we call it Snapple. And the guy's looking at you like you fell off the moon. Merciful friend who has mercy, have mercy on me. Pal, you're in a very comfortable situation over here. You're sitting back in a comfortable chair, the air conditioner is on. It's not like you're dehydrated. You're drinking a cup of water, there's ice in your cup. There's a lemon in your cup. So you don't have iced tea, but this is not the time and the place to invoke mercy. God, have mercy on me. Have mercy on me? Why are you invoking the concept of mercy? What does mercy have to do with anything? And imagine if your friend who is reluctant to give you some of the iced tea, you said, "Really? I can't believe it. Don't you remember my great-grandfather? When your great-grandfather was in a desperate situation, my great-grandfather bailed him out. So I have ancestral merits. So do me a favor, give me some peach Snapple, give me some iced tea." That would be quite bizarre for somebody to invoke Zechus Avos to get a cup of iced tea when he has every comfort in the world. However, imagine the following scenario. Someone's walking in the Sahara Desert, someone's walking in a very difficult situation. Someone who is completely sapped of all his energy, someone who's completely dehydrated, and he's about to faint, perhaps about to die of dehydration. And off in the distance, he sees somebody with a cup of water. He goes running over to the person. Would you ask, "Well, I was just wondering, would you think perhaps you could consider," and no problem, maybe you'll get back to me on this one, "would you perhaps consider sharing with me a bit of your water?" No pressure. Nobody's going to ask that way. Because when your life is on the line, when your health is on the line, you don't say, "Would you consider, I was just wondering." You say, "My merciful friend who has mercy, have mercy on me." And if needed, you're going to invoke every merit you have in your repertoire to try to get a hold of that water, because that water is literally life. You could analyze the Shemona Esrei. There are 19 things we pray for every day. In none of them do we make a big deal that what we're about to ask for is so desperate that we ask Ribbon Shalom, we ask God to have mercy. We don't say, merciful God who has mercy on us. We don't invoke that, not for Parnasa, not even for Refuah, not in Shema Koilenu. We say twice, Chus v'rachim aleinu. There seems to be nothing that important in the Shemona Esrei that it warrants us invoking the mercy of God 3 times. There's only one request in the entire Siddur that we feel that this request is so vital, so important, we're so desperate for it, that we need to pull every trick out of our bag and say, merciful God, who has mercy, have mercy on us. What are we asking the Ribbon Shalom for? Nachas from our children? No. A good job? Good food? A shidduch maybe? No. We're asking, Avinu, Ha'av Harachaman, our Father, merciful Father, Hamerachim, who has mercy, Rachim Aleinu. And what? What are we asking the Ribbon Shalom for? V'sein b'libeinu bina. Please help us understand. Lahavin, to comprehend, ulahaskel, that we should have a deep understanding. Lishmaya, to hear the Torah, to understand the Torah. Lilmoid, to learn Torah. Ulelamed, to teach the Torah. Lishmar, to observe the lasos and to fulfill. There's only one thing in this world that is so vital, that is so important, that is so basic, that is so fundamental, that we pull out every trick in our arms. We say, Avinu of Harachaman, Hamerachim Rachim Aleinu. And not only that, if that's not enough, we say, Ba'avor Avoseinu Shabbat Chubacha. We say, Ribbon Shalom, please, not in my merit, in the merit of my holy grandfather, my holy great-grandfather, my holy ancestors. When we ask for refuah, somebody is lo yaleinu ill. We don't ask Hashem, heal the person in the merit of our forefathers. It's almost as if we don't have the gumption to act as if we're so desperate that we're going to pull that out of our repertoire. But when it comes to a deeper, more profound, more meaningful understanding of the Torah, nothing is overkill. Ha'av harachaman, hamerachim rachim aleinu. Why? Why is this the most important request in life? Why is this the most important request in the Siddur? The Siddur is pretty big. A lot of people say there are a lot of pages in the Siddur. It takes me a long time. Why is this the most important request of all? And the answer is very simple. We explain it in the corresponding bracha in the evening in Marav. The reason is Kihem chayenu va'oirach yameinu. Because learning Torah is not a cup of iced tea. We think of it like a cup of iced tea. You know how we sometimes think of Torah? Yeah, when I get around to it, if it fits into my schedule, today it's not going to work. This week it's not going to work. Maybe in Elul. No, Elul, I'll wait till Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah, I'll wait till Yom Kippur. Hoshana Rabbah is when the Kvitlach go out. I have until Chanukah, Toshav Enesh Adaka, Tu B'Shvat the Mekubalim say. Nisan B'Nisan Nivra Olam. We always have reasons why it is not so critical for us to really begin learning now. Because we view Torah as, look, I'm in a comfortable situation. My life is good. As soon as I just organize my affairs a little bit, I'll definitely get around to that iced tea of learning. But we enunciate daily that Torah is not iced tea. Torah is not a luxury. It's not a convenience. It's not even something essential to make our life more meaningful. But rather we say, Kihem chayenu va'oirach yameinu. Learning Torah is the very definition of life. A speaker in Europe once got up in the olden days, and one of these Magidim, and he got up and he was extolling the fundamental aspect, the fundamental nature of Torah, and he says, Torah is so important, it's like air to breathe. And Rav Baruch Bar Leibowitz, the great Rosh Yeshiva of Kamenetz, he protested. He was moiche. He said, no, that's an understatement. You're belittling the Torah. The Torah is not like air to breathe. The Torah is life itself. Which means that we have a basic understanding that our soul comes down to this world for a very short amount of time. 70, 80, 90, we hope 120 years. And what's it doing over here? What's its function? What's its purpose? What's its objective? One of the primary objective of being on this world, why Hashem created us, is to be misdabek to the Torah, to learn Torah. The Torah is our life. A Jew without Torah, it's almost as if they're not even alive, they're not breathing, they have no chiyus, they have no chayim. You know, we know throughout history the remarkable self-sacrifice that Yidden have made to learn Torah in the most difficult, in the most trying circumstances. You know, we could give many stories, we could offer many anecdotes. I'll just share with you a few. In the Olam HaYeshivas, in the yeshiva world, perhaps the most venerated sefer, the most lumdish sefer, the sefer of the greatest Talmudic analysis, the sefer Chizuk HaChoshen, written by Rabbi Aryeh Cohen. He also wrote Avnei Miluim, he also wrote the Shev Shmaitza, but the Chizuk HaChoshen is the highest echelon of Talmudic analysis. So we would think for somebody to have the wherewithal and somebody to be able to probe the depths of the Talmud, of the Gemara, of the Shas, they must have been sitting back in a library, in a comfortable library with a perfect lighting, surrounded by books, surrounded by the perfect setting to encourage and to inspire in-depth study. Do you know what kind of conditions the Chizuk was written in? He was so poor. He had such deprivation. It was so cold in his flat, in his apartment, that literally he had to keep his inkwell under his arm, under his cover, so that the inkwell would not freeze, because it was so freezing cold. The conditions were so impossible. These were the conditions that the Chizuk HaChoshen had to write his sefer in. Magen Avram, the classic Noisei Kli on Orach Chaim. So we think the Magen Avram, he had to have a situation where he was able to really clarify the Shulchan Aruch. He had, the Gemara says, Shmaitza boitzilusa, learning Torah needs clarity. So he must have been sitting in this great academy with windows that were high up in the sky, and he was able to focus on his learning in great comfort. The Magen Avram was so poor that he could not afford a pen. He had to use the coals of his oven to write Magen Avram. Furthermore, the Magen Avram was so poor he could not afford paper. Many of his chidushim he wrote on the walls of his home. And we think about these stories and we say, these people, they sacrificed. Mesiras nefesh. They gave up of their life. They sacrificed their life and comfort to be able to learn. And of course we know many stories in the Holocaust, in those dark years, where under the most trying conditions, with the threat of death, people continue to learn the Gemara, to speak to the Rabbi. I'll read to you a little account from my grandfather in his memoirs. My grandfather writes, he wrote this article in Das Yiddish Wort many years ago, and let me just locate it here. He writes, we were hauled to the forced labor camp in Bedzin and labored there under the most brutal conditions. In the early morning darkness, in the freezing temperatures of the bitter winter, we stood for a lineup, then performed back-breaking labor under constant whippings. What provided us the secret, mysterious strength and endurance to continue breathing? In other words, how did we survive? Why didn't we throw in the towel? What gave us the reason to continue on? My grandfather writes, Lule soirascha sha'ashuai azavadati ba'ani. If not for the torch of Torah that aided me, I would have been lost and succumbed to my sufferings. We stood together with our dear unforgettable friends, the great brothers, Rabbi Itchamayr Zemba, Rabbi Avramcha Zemba, the Rabbanim of Warsaw, Rabbi David Shapiro, Rabbi Shimshon Stackhammer, along with many other Talmidei Chachamim, with whom we were able to discourse in Torah during the dismal nights. B'machashakim hoishivani, the Gemara in Sanhedrin says, Zet Talmud Bavli. During the dark Golos nights, the Gemara, the Talmud, that these precious Jews remembered and recited by heart, served as a ner tamid, an eternal light, to illuminate their hopeless, downtrodden hearts. So we're familiar with these types of stories. But the way we sort of digest the story, the way we react to the story is, look, these people had mesiras nefesh. They gave up their life to be able to learn Torah. So I would just like to make a little bit of a tweak and a little bit of a reality change in perhaps the way we perceive some of these stories. This past Shabbos I read an account of two Russian refuseniks who, after 45 years in communist regime in the Gulag, they came to America and they appeared before the Gadol Hadar, the Posek Hadar, Rav Moshe Feinstein Zechat Levracha. Their names were Rav Yankel Notik and Rav Mato Kazlaner. So Rav Moshe sees these two Yidden, Erliche Yidden, and he asked them, how were you able to do this? How is it possible? They were able to keep this way under the oppressive regime, with fear of imprisonment. Worse, how did you teach your children? How did you keep the Shabbos? How did you learn Torah? And they gave such a powerful answer. They didn't say, yeah, it was worth it. They didn't say, we were Meiser Nefesh. They answered, did we have a choice? We had no choice. That's all we had to do. What were they saying? What was this response? They were exclaiming their deep conviction that Torah is not a luxury. Torah is not something we do, it makes us feel better. No, Torah is our life. There's no life without the Torah. I'm not being moiser nefesh to learn. I'm not giving up of myself to be able to learn. Torah is chayim. It is life itself. There's no alternative. We have no choice. Perhaps we're familiar with the mashal, with the parable that's brought in Koheles, cited by the Mesilas Yesharim. You know, the princess is engaged to marry the villager, a peasant. And finally they get married, and he brings her back to his hut. And he's trying to make his new bride, his new kala, happy. What could he do to make his kala happy? So he's cooking up the best porridge, the best stew that could give his new wife some satisfaction. And she's looking at this pot, and she's looking at this food, and she's thinking to herself, this is food, this is happiness, this is a delicacy. She looks at it this way because she's used to a different currency. She's used to the fine cuisine of the palace. So this porridge and these beans are nothing to her. They don't do anything for her. Does not hit the spot. It's almost meaningless. He's trying to make her happy. Maybe she wants music, so he takes a metal spoon and he starts banging it on his can. And she's thinking to herself, this is music? She's used to the symphonies of the palace. Says the Ramchal, says the Mesilas Yesharim, the neshama, the Jewish soul, is literally a piece of the divine, as the Zohar teaches us. Man de nafach midilei nafach. When God instilled our soul within us, He instilled something from within Himself, which means that our neshama, our soul, is literally composed of divine material. It comes from the Shamayim, it comes from the heavenly palace. And in that heavenly palace, the only true pleasure is divine pleasure, connecting to the Ribbono Shel Olam, Torah and mitzvahs. And so the body comes down into this world, and it tries to make itself happy. Maybe eat a little bit, maybe indulge in pleasure a little bit, and the soul is looking at it. It's like it's a joke. It's all a joke. This is not life. This is meaningless. This is not pleasure. There's only one thing that's life to the neshama. There's only one thing that gives the neshama some meaning in this world, and that is Torah and mitzvahs. Torah does not facilitate life. Torah does not give us some meaning. Torah is the very definition of life. I want to speak about an aspect of Limud Torah that perhaps is overlooked or not as well known as some of the other aspects that are generally focused on when it comes to learning Torah. The Gemara says in Pesachim, there was a man by the name of Rav Sheshes, one of the great Amoraim. And Rav Sheshes, he knew his Torah so well, he would review everything he learned every 30 days. And at the end of 30 days, he would climb up on a tightrope and he would proclaim the following. He would cry out, Chadoi nafshoi, says the Gemara Pesachim Samaches. My soul, rejoice, my soul, rejoice. You know why I learned? He would say, Kroi lecha, I learned for you. Tanoi lecha, I learned Mishnah for you. Seems a little selfish. Why would he say this? What did he mean? I learned for you, I learned Chumash for you, I learned Mishnah for you. The Gemara asks, we learn more than just for ourselves. The Gemara says, the learning of Torah literally holds up the world. If there would be a moment that Torah was not learned in the world would self-destruct, would cease to exist, it would disintegrate. That's why Reb Chaim Volozhiner is reputed to have said, that's why God created time zones. Back in the day, everyone was in Eretz Yisrael, and the people were learning around the clock. But what are you going to do? You read das Hatorah, people can't learn the way they always did. So Yibam Shem scattered the Jewish people all over the world. So when the Jews in America are learning, the Jews in England maybe are sleeping, the Jews in Israel are sleeping. When the Yidden in Eretz Yisrael are up, so the Yidden in America could go to sleep. Somewhere in the world, there's always someone learning. That's literally the life of the world. That's the Chavetz Chaim writes that when God gave us the Torah on Har Sinai, we say this every day in davening. We say in Sim Shalom, the Torah is Torah's Chaim. What do we mean that the Torah is a Torah's Chaim? Chavetz Chaim explains that when Hashem gave us the Torah, He opened up the inner chambers of the universe. You ever, open up a watch? So they open up the watch, and inside the watch, you see all the gadgets of the watch. You see the inner workings of the watch. So when Hashem gave us the Torah in Har Sinai, He opened up the Rakia, He opened up the Tahaim, and we saw what is the lifeblood of the world, what keeps the world going, what pulsates vitality into the world. The Torah is the Torah's Chayim. It literally pulsates life into the world. So why would Reb Sheshes say, I'm learning for myself? I'm not learning for myself. I'm learning to uphold the whole world. It brings bracha to the whole world. Rabbi Chanan Wasserman asks a very interesting question. Rabbi Chanan asks that we know every morning we say, Elu dvarim sha'adam oichal peroiseim ba'olam hazeh v'akaran kayem s'olam haba. These are the things that a person eats from the fruits of in this world. And the Rambam explains that any mitzvah that you do that benefits society, you're rewarded in this world. So when you visit the sick, and when you do acts of kindness, and when you help somebody get married, you get benefit in this world, you get fruits in this world. So ask Rabbi Chanan, why is one of the mitzvahs mentioned, Talmud Torah? Talmud Torah, you're not helping anybody. No, says Rabbi Chanan, Talmud Torah, you're helping everybody, you're helping the whole world. So the Gemara asks, why would Rav Sheshes say, rejoice me, I learned for me, I learned Mishnah for me. He's learning for the whole world. And the Gemara says an incredible answer. The Gemara says, me'ikara, in principle, on the most basic level, ki avid inish, when a person learns Torah, adaita de nafshi ka'avid, he does it for himself. What does this mean? You learn Torah for yourself? Learning Torah should be an act of altruism to the whole world. Friends, I want to share with you an astounding comment of the Gra. The Gra in the Adaras Elio on Devarim says, a davar nifla ad ma'od, wondrous words. We're all familiar, we know there's 613 mitzvahs, and we tend to think there are two types of mitzvahs. There are mitzvahs bein adam la'makam, between me and God, and there are mitzvahs bein adam la'chaveroi, between me and my friend. So when I pray, that's between me and God. When I lend money, that's between me and my friend. There are two kinds of mitzvahs. The Gra says, no, there are three kinds of mitzvahs. And the Gra says it as follows. We know that as important as it is to keep the Torah, even more important is the life of a Jew. Life of a Jew takes precedence over all the mitzvahs in the Torah, except for three. There are three mitzvahs in the Torah that are so fundamental, one has to give up their life not to violate. Adultery, idolatry, and murder. Says the Gra, murder, that's between you and your friend. That's ben adam lachaveroi. That's a corruption of your relationship with your friend. Idolatry, that's between you and God. You're severing your connection to the Lord. You're severing your connection to the Ribbon Shalom. But there's a third kind of sin. It's not between you and God. And it's not between you and your friend. It's between you and you. You're ruining yourself. You're ruining your soul. And that is adultery. Noyaf ish chasar leiv. You're destroying yourself. Adultery ruins you. There's bein adam la'makom, bein adam la'chaveroi. Says the goyim, there's bein adam la'atzmai. There are averos that are self-destructive. And says the Gra, it's the same thing with mitzvahs. There are mitzvahs between you and God. Prayer. You daven shachris, you daven mincha, you daven musaf, you say tehillim. You daven, you pray. That's between you and God. Then there's gemilas chasadim, acts of kindness. That's between you and your neighbor, you and your friend. But there's a mitzvah that's not so much between you and God. It's not so much between you and your friend. It's between you and you. Says the Gra, Talmud Torah. Talmud Torah is bein adam la'atzmai. It's between man and himself. It's between man and his neshama. I'll tell you very briefly, this is a famous idea, but I want to say it just very concisely. You know, we just read last week Parshas B'chukaisai, and the pasuk says, "In B'chukaisai telechu." If you walk in my statutes, you're going to have money, you're going to have rain, you're going to have agriculture, you're going to have everything. And Chazal are trying to identify what does it mean in B'chukaisai telechu. It can't mean if you observe the mitzvahs, because that's actually the next stanza in the pasuk. So Rashi famously quotes Chazal, in B'chukaisai telechu, shatiu amelim b'Torah. It means immerse yourself in the Torah. Work hard in Torah. Toil in the Torah. Dedicate yourself to the Torah. So the question is, how does Rashi know, how do Chazal know that it means to toil in Torah? Maybe it just means to learn. Just regular learning. I'll sit back, I'll rest on a hammock, I'll sip lemonade, and I'll learn Torah. All we know is it doesn't mean the observance of mitzvahs. That was already said, but how do you know it's toiling in Torah? Maybe it's just learning Torah. So Rav Shmuel Rozovsky, Rashiva Panovich, famously says, the pasuk says, in B'chukaisai telechu, you will walk. Walk means to climb from level to level. It means to grow. In Yiddish we say to steig. In English, there's a concept, a nouveau concept, but it is rooted in the Torah. Self-actualization. How do you bring out your potential? How do you make yourself greater? How do you bring out your latent and dormant ability and talent? Yes, I have ways to connect me and God. That's when I pray. I have ways to improve my relationships between me and my friend. That's when I do acts of kindness. But how do I bring out, how do I activate, how do I self-actualize the greatness and the power and the ability that lays dormant in my soul? Talmud Torah. In B'chukaisai telechu. If you're walking and you're growing and you're elevating from one level to level, there's only one way for self-actualization. We have many, many mitzvahs, and they could bring us close to our friends and close to God, but there's only really one way to bring out the greatness that lays dormant in our soul, and that is learning Torah, dedicating ourselves to Torah, and toiling in the Torah. The Maral Masechta Sanhedrin says that in every soul, as we mentioned, there's a piece of the divine. That means within me, within you, there's endless greatness. There's endless capacity for compassion, for kindliness, for love, for sensitivity, for wisdom, to probe the secrets of the universe. In every Jewish soul, there's endless capacity for greatness, but right now it's a well, and it's buried deep, deep down. And there's only one way to draw it out, says the Maharal. There's only one mitzvah that is like water. Imagine you had a luscious garden. Planted in that garden was every delectable fruit, but it's not like in England that it rains every day. Sorry, that no insult over there. Okay, I love England. I'll just bring an extra umbrella, no problem. But it's not like, it's like one of these countries that never rains, so you're not going to have any fruit. Yes, our souls are full of many wondrous seeds, but the water that will water our soul and bring out our latent greatness, that's ein mayim el Torah. The Maharal writes, the learning of Torah brings out the inherent greatness that lies within us. And this is the explanation, and these ideas that I'm stringing together are found in the Sefer Mizmar LeDavid of Reb David Cohen, the Rosh Yeshiva of Hebron. And he beautifully connects the Vilna Gaon to the Maharal, that when the Vilna Gaon says that learning Torah is not bein adam la'makayim, it's not bein adam la'chaver, it's bein adam la'atzmai, because Torah has the capacity to elevate someone, to help a person grow, to help a person with self-actualization, to help a person bring out his latent greatness. And therefore Reb Sheshes, every 30 days, he rejoiced in his learning, not because he gave life to the whole world, he did that. But that's not the primary benefit of learning. The primary benefit is not what you do for mankind. It's not what you do for the universe. It's what you do for you. Chadi nafshai, chadi nafshai. Says the Gemara, me'ikara ki avid inish adaita de nafshi ka-avid. You know, the Gemara says, Rabbi Yosef said, if not for this day, Kama yoisi ika beshuki. If not for the day of the giving of the Torah, we like to say, he said, I would be the average Joe. I would just be an average person. Why? Look at Rashi. Rashi says, if not for this day that I learned Torah, v'nisroi mamti, I elevated myself. Fulfilling a mitzvah may not have that capacity. Whether it's the bein adam la'makom, bein adam la'chaver, yes, it will connect you to God, it will connect you to your friend. But in terms of personal growth, elevating the soul, in terms of bringing out its greatness, that is the central role of Talmud Torah. And of course, one of the main ideas that we like to bring out about learning Torah is the Yom Tov of Shavuos is coming up. And of course, one of our favorite minhagim on Shavuos is dairy. Many people have dairy on Shavuos. This is a legislated minhag. It's brought in the Ramah. But what's amazing is the earliest source of having dairy on Shavuos comes from the Kolbai, one of the Rishonim that was written somewhat anonymously. We don't know who wrote it. The Kolbai writes, the reason we have dairy on Shavuos is because Torah in Shir Hashirim is compared to Dvash v'chalav, honey and milk. I once heard from Rav Avigdor Miller, bracha, honey and milk are two distinct types of tastes, two delectable tastes that when combined produces the unparalleled combination. But the reason we have dairy on Shavuos is to indicate Torah is so sweet, it's so delicious, it's so delectable, it gives such happiness. Says Rabbi Yitzchak Barditchev, the reason why Hakal Moedim, the reason why everybody agrees that on Shavuos we have to celebrate physically, is because we have to give over the lesson. We have to convey to our children that Torah is not just something we do because we have to. It's not just something we do because it is life. It's so delicious. It's so enjoyable. In fact, there's an amazing remez from the Chassam Sofer. Chassam Sofer says, take the first letter of the Torah, Beis. Take the last letter of the Torah, Lamed. Take the middle letters of the Torah. We know the Gemara says, Darosh, Darash. So you take the last shin of the first Darash, the first Dalet of the second Darash. And then the word Gachain, the Ches of Gachain and the Vav of Gachain. So you take those 6 letters, Beis Lamed, Shin Dalet, Ches Vav, spells out, you know what the Torah is? Through and through and through, Dvash v'chalav, honey and milk. It's so delicious, it's so delectable. There's nothing in this world that compares to it. There's nothing in this world that has meaning compared to it. As the Orach Chaim, Reb Chaim Ibn Attar, writes his immortal words, Reb Chaim Ibn Attar writes, in Parshas Kisavai, im hayu b'nei adam margishin b'mesikus v'arevos tova Torah. If people would appreciate the sweetness, the delectability of the goodness of Torah, if somebody would just begin, it's too hard to learn, just start, just Learn one amud, learn a blat, review it a few times. You're going to see, once a person begins to sense, to feel the delectability of Torah, one would insanely pursue the Torah, and nothing in this world, no gold, no silver, no money, no pleasure would have any value. Once you start to have that sensation, it's like once somebody begins to eat fine foods, they can't eat fast food anymore. It just, it doesn't go, it doesn't fly. Once a person starts to feel that happiness and that sweetness, then everything else pales. Torah is not only our life. Not only do we not have a choice, it is so delicious, it is so fulfilling, it is so delectable. And therefore, the Gemara tells us something that is so powerful and something that is so overlooked. The Gemara tells us, and can I have a few more minutes? If that's okay? Thank you. I guess that nobody responded. You can't even respond. So what are you going to say already? But the Gemara tells us that why was the temple destroyed? Mibnei ma'avda ha'aretz. 2 thumbs up? Okay. 2 thumbs up. Mibnei ma'avda ha'aretz. Why was the land destroyed in the times of the first Beis Hamikdash? The Gemara says, "Mibnei shloi baruchu b'Torah b'tchila." They did not make blessings over the Torah, which is a very difficult thing to say, because the Gemara tells us clearly in Masechta Yuma that the first temple was destroyed because of Avodah Zarah, Gilui Arayos, and Shvichas Damim. They violated the 3 biggies, the 3 cardinal sins. But even more difficult is the Gemara says that this lack of observance of not making Berachas Hatorah was so imperceivable, was not recognized, not by the sages of the generation, not by the prophets of the generation, and not even by the angels. So I never understood that. I don't understand. I'm a rabbi in a shul. I come into shul and I see people are skipping Berachas HaTorah. So it's not rocket science. I know that the problem is that they're not saying Berachas HaTorah. No, none of the rabbis knew, none of the prophets knew, none of the angels knew. I don't understand. Why is this so complicated? Just look, nobody's saying Berachas HaTorah. The Lavush writes incredible words. The Lavush says, of course they made Berachas HaTorah. Yes, they said the words, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvahs v'tzivanu la'asek b'divrei Torah. God, I bless you that you commanded me to involve myself in Torah. Yes, they said those words. But they made a fundamental error. You know what the error that they made was? They thought the reason why they made a blessing on the Torah was because you always make a blessing before you do any mitzvah. You put on tefillin, you make a blessing. You put on tzitzis, you make a blessing. You shake a lulav and esrog, you make a blessing. Of course, they made a blessing over the Torah as well. That's not the reason you make a blessing before you learn Torah. Berachas HaTorah, says Lavush, is not a berachas ha-mitzvah. It's not a blessing over the performance of a mitzvah. It's a berachas ha-nehenin. You know why we make a blessing over the Torah? We make a blessing over the Torah because you make a blessing before you drink iced tea and before you eat steak and before you eat pizza. So you can't get pleasure in this world without blessing God, without saying a bracha. Says the Lavush, of course they made a blessing over the Torah. But they made a blessing thinking it was just a regular mitzvah. They didn't make a blessing over the Torah recognizing that they were about to engage in intense pleasure. The Lavush says, we know why the temple was destroyed. The temple was destroyed because they violated the big 3. The Gemara's question is, I don't understand. Look around. There are all these big rabbis. There are all these great chachamim. There are all these big sages. But the next generation, nobody's interested. There are no young Talmidei Chachamim anymore. There are no young scholars anymore. There are no young Torah students anymore. What happened to the children? What happened to the next generation? And you know what happened to the next generation? They saw their father and their mother, when they made a blessing on the Torah, when they learned Torah, they just thought they were doing a mitzvah. So they would see their father come home and they would say, Daddy, Tati, what are you about to do? I'm about to learn. Why are you about to learn? Well, God told me to. So, Jews have been giving up their lives for thousands of years to learn Torah, so that's what I do. And I'm even going to make a blessing over it. So the kid says, well, if it's so painful, and it's so difficult, and it requires such self-sacrifice, what do I need it for? You learn your Torah, and I'll watch soccer. That's the game you play over there in your country, which in America we don't even know what it is. I'll play Kadar Regel. What do I need it for? Their mistake was that they didn't teach their children that we don't make a blessing over the Torah because it's something we have to do. It's not like every other mitzvah. We make a blessing over the Torah because it's the greatest joy, happiness, most meaningful experience, most pleasurable experience that we have available to us in this existence for a short number of years. We don't make a blessing over the Torah because it's a mitzvah. We make a blessing over the Torah because it's happiness. And says the Lavush, if we're able to do that, then we'll merit v'niya anachnu v'tze'etzainu kulanu yoidei shemecha v'loimdei sarsech lishma. When a person gives over to their children, yes, the Torah is our life. Yes, we have no choice. Yes, this is the purpose of existence. But we wouldn't have it any other way. It's such a happiness. It's such a sweetness. It's such a milk and honey. It's so geshmak. It's so delectable. We're making a bracha like we make a blessing over every other physical sensation we have. That's the kind of Torah that gets passed down to our children. When children understand that we feel it's dvash v'chalav, then it will be v'niya anachnu v'tze'etzainu kulanu yoidei shemecha. This is a Torah that is successfully transmitted to the next generation. So, we ask Hashem, Ribbono Shel Olam, without Torah we are desperate. Merciful Father, who has mercy, have mercy on us. We understand Torah is our life. We understand that through Torah we actualize the greatness that lay dormant within us. Torah is for ourselves. Torah is bein adam la'atzmai. Torah helps us grow. Torah helps bring out the greatness that lies dormant within us. And the best news of all is there's no greater happiness that is available to us. Every time we put back a Sefer Torah, we say, Eitz Chayim hi lemachazikam ba. The Torah is a tree of life to those who grab hold of it. This is analogous to somebody, says Reb Chaim Volozhiner, who's being pulled asunder in a raging river. So imagine somebody being carried away in a raging river, and his head is going under the water, and he's fighting for survival, and he sees there's a tree growing by the river bank, and he has the opportunity to hold on to that tree and to save his life. How is he going to hold on to the tree? Oh, well, I'm a righty, but let me see if I could grab onto that tree with my left pinky. No, nobody would do that. Nobody would hold it with their left hand. They would embrace the tree with every fiber of their being and every ounce of strength they have. Says Reb Chaim Volozhiner, in this world, yes, Torah is our life. Yes, Torah is happiness. But we have challenges. And the challenges of this world and the distractions of this world threaten to pull us asunder. The Yetzer Hara threatens to take all eternal and even happiness in this world away from us. But we have a tree of life. We have the Torah. How are we going to hold on to that tree of life? How are we going to embrace the Torah? When I get around to it, when it fits into my schedule, I'll try to make a couple of minutes. We're going to embrace the Torah with both of our arms and with every ounce of strength, heart, intellect, and emotion we have. And in that merit and that zechus, the Ribbono Shel Olam will surely bless us with the blessings of the Torah. Oirech yamim bimina, on the right side is long life, usmoila oisher v'chavod, and on its left side, by learning Torah, by being involved in the mitzvahs, by being involved in the daily, constant study and toil in the Torah, not only does it give us long, eternal life, it gives us a biminas, b'smaila oisher v'chavod, wealth, respect, honor. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to share with you this evening, and wishing everyone a Chag Kosher v'Sameach, bracha v'Hatzlacha. Thank you so much. Kol Tov. Okay.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.